And we're live with our 227th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on X, joined by my co-host, Seth Law at Seth Law on X. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We've got a few things that we wanted to talk about today. First off, though, it's December in memoriam of everyone's years. A couple of years ago, I've got my Log4 Shell sweater on, just because, right? Remembering a time when everyone was all panicked. Well, I mean, I guess everyone else felt the Q4 push that you and I have felt for years. I guess I don't know. Yeah, as far as everything else goes, we've got a few things that are on our calendar up and coming. I think both Ken and I will be at Cactus Con. I did actually get my ticket. It wasn't for whatever reason, I missed the CFP on that one, right? Like it came and went in the midst of everything else, but we'll definitely be on site. Probably going to reach out to the organizer there and see about doing a happy hour or something associated with the conference, as we'll be on site. Outside of that, I did want to everything okay?
No, I'm reading Slack. Sorry, our Absolute AppSec Slack.
Oh, sweet. Okay, good call. SolarWinds shirt. There we go. Right, Leisure Suit Larry. Yes. I did want to give a shout out to Redpoint as our sponsor for today. Redpoint specializes in code security for coders, bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of applications, including web, mobile, AI, and Web3 apps. Redpoint also offers training to help ground your teams in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redspointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. I did also want to give a shout out to Dry Run. I know there's big stuff happening today, Ken. I don't know if we want to get into that now or we can get into it later. Might be a good thing to address because I have had questions pop up about what's going on over at Dry Run, but I've been cagey because I'm like, I don't know what I can say, but you should talk to Ken. So that,
today I can actually say stuff. Yeah. So first of all, for our listeners, today is our open beta release. So if you want to try the very early days of the product, you can go to app.dryrun.security and you can sign up for an account. It takes like 30 seconds to set up. I mean, it's really just installing a GitHub app. So you can install it on your personal repos if you want, even public stuff if you just want to do some low friction, testing or low risk testing or whatever. But in any case, I'm just super excited, obviously, because it's been, I think for me, I left GitHub and it's been about 9 months. And through that 9-month journey, we were trying to find we knew what the goal was, but how to hit that is a very hard thing to do and meet a lot of different criteria, but also stay in line with your product vision. We had a lot of early days. I remember at KernelCon, I was trying to hack together our first earlier prototype of something that we ended up kind of dumping and saying, okay, I think this is the better way to go about it. But in case anyone's curious, I have a blog post up discussing a bit about the product and what we're going for at our blog for Dry Run Security. And, what I'll say is that what we're trying to do right now is the ultimate goal is to take in a bunch of different factors about the code. Not just the code that's changing, but who's changing the code and a whole bunch of factors. I've kind of listed the first few on on that blog. But take those different factors, perform contextual security analysis, which is getting the entire picture, taking in a bunch of different context. And then, just surfacing in a risk score. But right now, we're really trying to tune up our individual analyzers that are pulling different information, like what type of app is this? And, are you introducing changes that have sensitive files, sensitive functions, the obvious thing that we're working on is actual code analysis as well to provide you with security risks. meaning like traditional AppSec risks. But it's not just traditional AppSec risks, right? We're talking about the intent of the author, or their level of familiarity with the code, or the brittleness of the code, or a whole bunch of other factors, to include other stuff that we always talk about is like, are you changing something that's an important framework nuance bit? And like, should we be concerned about that? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're going for here. We also have a chat bot in there as well that developers can use in future iterations. They can use it now, but it's going to be fine-tuned in future iterations to really give contextually relevant answers to that specific PR and repo. So I don't know, man. Like, I'm really stoked. It's, finally something I can give to people to start kind of helping improve our engines, but then ultimately help them, in turn, produce some actual signal in the noise in a helpful way. Anyways, so I don't want to spend the whole episode obviously talking about that, but I'm just very, very excited. So once again, you can go to, and I'll put this in the chat here. You can go to https app.dryrun.security and get started. We will gate you in, though. We are like doing this on a case-by-case basis. So just something to be aware of. Yeah, so you will get activated. It should be fairly short, but we do a little bit of vetting of who's all coming in. Anyways, all right. So not to bore everybody and lose viewers.
Yeah,
I'll stop.
No, that's fine, right? Like, I mean, any of the tools, the new tools that are coming out, right? Like Dry Run, like actually having a demo of those would be good at some point as well, because I know. Personally, it popped up because we're doing, we've got some stuff that we're working on, and we use GitHub. So we had installed, I guess the beta, right? The dev instance.
Alpha.
The alpha. The pre-alpha. But we've been playing with like some of the responses. So I had a couple of the guys that were in there doing some work, and they're like, oh, we're seeing these like PRs come in from Dry Run about, sensitive files or things that aren't quite set up yet. And I was like, yeah. Pay attention to it. But yeah, we need to run through it again. So, and that,
for sure.
It's
only going to get better.
Yep. It's iterating, right? Like that's the whole idea. I mean, we do that around the, across the board, and I think we've seen this over time as well. I was on before we get into articles and other stuff, right? Like I was on a,
oh
yeah,
I spelt it wrong.
You spelled it wrong.
You. Oh my gosh.
I was on a call recently with a client. Like we talk about this iterative approach to security in general and like development as it goes, right? I had we were on the phone with a client that I've been working with since we started Redpoint, right? So we're talking 5-6 years. Remember coming into their app early days, like some old Java Spring app from, that had been developed years and years ago. And, finding, dozens of things that were wrong with it, outside of, everything from portions of even SQL injection that were in there to today, they've got a whole like security program running, like we're talking 5-6 years later. And what we're seeing is actually our life is super difficult when it comes to finding vulnerabilities and, recommending stuff that they have to do. They're at this point now that when we discuss security things, it's all about, okay, what's the process? How do we make sure that we're implementing things? How do we make sure that we're staying secure, as opposed to, oh crap, everything's on fire and I need to go to fix 500 things. But where I was going with that is just this iterative approach to security, right? Like those success stories that we have are working with teams and working with products year over year to make it better, as opposed to, what do you call it, seagoing or whatever it is, where somebody flies in, shits on everything, and then flies away, right? Like, and it doesn't take that approach of, hey, we're trying to build something together. It's just more of a, one-off, whatever, scan or, vulnerability report, that we happen to stumble across.
Well, that's kind of my intention, right? Is like to build something that you can actually literally upload your own, sort of knowledge base of things that typically go wrong, stuff that auditors have hit you on, stuff that's coming through bug bounties and all of that, and then use that as a source of hey, this is your specific application type. These are the changes that are going on, and these are the problems that you've had in the past, and then surface risk, on patterns like that, as well as a bunch of other patterns. But I think that's kind of like definitely the biggest issue I have right now in our programs is that we have all this data that we just don't use, right? It just sits around. It's like, to your point, like you come in and you do an assessment. Maybe you do that twice a year, right? Every 6 months. Cool. There's definitely some, collateral that's getting produced of value that
Yep.
shows, like, that literally creates patterns for what are like known bad patterns for your app. Same thing happens with bug bounty programs. Same thing happens, with valid scanner findings. There's a whole bunch of things that we use, but we use them as a more reactive function than we do ever a proactive function, but we could make those proactive things. And when you do pattern analysis and you have LLMs and you have RAG, there's no reason to take that data and let it just sit around and not use it. And so that's kind of been my whole thing the last, I'd say half of the year, is like, damn, the technology exists. Let's use it. Let's do things a little differently than we have been in the past. Let's get off this, everybody says, let's get off the hamster wheel. Let's do that. Stop letting that data just sit around and be, unused. I'm just repeating myself, but you get it.
No. And that's going to be you and I have been talking, as you've been digging into this and some of the stuff that you're building from context and analysis, like, also like including that in like the code review portions, right? Like our manual code reviews, we're always going to be doing manual code reviews at some level, right? Like,
sure,
we're going to be validating code. Yeah, we should be, but we can speed up a lot of what we're doing, right? Like, I got to tell you, just being able to throw, like I've been throwing VTM at an LLM, right? And asking it the questions that we do, and that usually takes us like 3 or 4 hours to get through in the course. I'm like, damn, that only took like 10 minutes, right? Like, tell me X, Y, and Z, tell me how authorization's done, tell me like all these different things. And it understands enough just based on like tokenization and the vectors and like, the language and natural questions, that it's almost like we're starting to just take our, our information gathering phase of the course of the code review methodology, and hey, let's just give the LLM that and let it tell us, or let AI tell us what it thinks. We can go validate, because there's still portions that it that it fails on, and we'll definitely show that in the course in the upcoming versions, right? Right, like it's authorization stuff that once you start digging into actual like calls inside of functions that do things that it can't necessarily figure out what the context is, but there's a lot of that base level context that it's very easy for it to understand, right? We can train it.
Well, so, and that's kind of that's what I was going to say, that it's not just training models, right? It's actually like the whole concept of feeding it, again, documents that actually answer the question in the way that you have to pose the question correctly. And also, when you talk about context, there's what I've learned is also like context is it's a tricky thing in how you represent it, what you're giving, how you almost have to like chain essentially outputs from. So like you're not feeding like one giant bit of context. You're almost like creating little bits of context with kind of quick calls, and then using the output of those calls that becomes more effective. But again, you mentioned training. Training is also effective and helpful there. Also, the type of model you use. Like one thing that I learned early on is like, of course, we all gravitate to trying ChatGPT and OpenAI, just to get off the ground and get going. But what you'll soon learn is that each model has like things that it's, which is our first article is kind of going to talk about Hugging Face. And so I'm going to bring up Hugging Face anyways, naturally, as part of this, because like they host a ton of various models that are like tuned for whatever thing you actually need. A good example would be like, even if you look at the Code Llama models, right? Code Llama has essentially 3 separate types of models, and then 3 separate sizes of models. So the sizes are like 7B, 32B, and 14, I think 14, or yeah, something like that, 14B. so that's the size, and that's whatever you're going to get. Larger size means better answers, of course. But what I will say is that there's, like I said, 3 different types. So an example would be, there's one type that's just great for inference. So it's like 7B or 14B or 32B. It's just inference. That's all it does. And that is better for like autofilling and inference. So like creating your own copilot kind of thing. That would be a great model for that. They also have ones that are fine-tuned just for Python, and those are, 7B hyphen Python, and so on and so forth. So they're just tuned for like the Python language. And then they've got Instruct, which Instruct operates more like a Q&A, kind of a chat type of thing on code, for instance, right? So even within just one type of model set, you've got multiple ways that it can be used, will be used, and the way that it's actually like what it's actually tuned for and its purpose. If you go to Hugging Face, right, like they're kind of the app store of models right now, or the de facto sort of like a GitHub or a package manager, which is the whole point of the first article. If we want to pull that up.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many options. That's the crazy thing. And there's so much out there. It can be a bit overwhelming in the beginning, for sure. I mean, even every day new stuff comes out, so it's always a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
Wait, are you talking about the dry run post, or you wanted to talk about
no the Hugging Face API
okay.
tokens?
I just posted. Yep.
Oh, thank you. All right, cool. Should I give a summary? Do you want to give a summary?
Yeah, go for it. Right? Like, yeah.
So basically, Lasso Security did some research. They found that approximately 1,500 repos they were able to, or 1,500 tokens, if I'm not mistaken. I read this a few days ago, but I believe it was like 1,500 plus tokens were exposed. The same kind of thing that we see, right? Like Slack tokens or AWS or anything else, people commit them, if there's a pattern to catch that type of sensitive key, that format of sensitive key. I know for a fact GitHub will send off to the various vendors, like Slack for their Slack key, AWS for their key, et cetera, et cetera. They'll actually send to those vendors like, hey, we saw this. That way the vendors can make a decision on like, do they want to revoke that token and recycle it, or rotate it, whatever they want to do, alert the user, whatever the individual providers want to do. So this is no different. I'm assuming that nothing has been built for Hugging Face. And so that was really kind of this article. It was like, the research in the article was like good in the sense of the meat of it. I thought there were some parts of it that were a little, just from like a, how do I say it, a little aggressive. I felt like, not the nicest phrasing at times and things like that. I actually find that to be pretty important. I feel like as a security, like when we find things, we should rep pretty hard in the nice category, or at least in the kind category anyways, empathetic category. We kind of have to. But in any case, the meat of it was really good. But ultimately, what I realized after reading that, I was like, oh, it's just like what happens with every package manager, essentially. And so those tokens got stolen. They were able to, if you have the token, you can do whatever with the repo that hosts the data set and the models, which I think was kind of their point. So you have essentially the ability to just put on your own LLM, right? Your own malicious model and data sets. Which is pretty nasty and pretty nefarious. So really, they're suffering from the same thing that every other registry it goes through. I'll say that, they do have some documentation, because like I originally saw this because Clint Gibbler tweeted it out, and I read the article and I was just curious. Anything AI, obviously, in security, I'm usually curious about. And so then I was like, if they're going through the same thing as every other package manager, let's look at their documentation to see if they even, what's their security, do they even talk about it? They do actually talk a little bit about it. I'm guessing, and they even say, like, I even replied in the tweet, like, a screenshot of the tweet, if I can pull it up here, or excuse me, of their docs pages. And it said, I want to get this right and say it verbatim. It says, try not to leak your token, though you can always rotate it. Anyone will be able to read or write your private repos in the meantime, which is, and they put the poop emoji. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
cool. You're right. You're right. So what I assume though is that, really this is one of those cases where we have something that's being recognized as a huge package manager now. It's going to become more popular. It has become more popular as people have realized the power of AI and are starting to like implement it into pretty much every product that I know of. So now you've got to do a lot of things, right? So now Hugging Face has to do all of the things that like an NPM went through. And I was there for when NPM went through like a hardcore cleanup of their security and required MFA and, looked at all the top all the ways to secure like the top package managers, and that becomes a game of figuring out the right heuristics and analytics to find out what we should consider an account that should require MFA and all those other security protections that were baked in. So now they're going to go through that natural evolution as well. So what are your thoughts on this? Is this like a failure of Hugging Face? Is this just natural evolution? Do you have other thoughts?
This is
curious.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I read through and I had a similar response to you. I was like, oh yeah, token leakage, right? Like for whatever reason, this has been a huge, well, not for whatever reason. I mean, it's always pretty devastating when somebody gets a hold of your token, right? AWS has had this problem. GitHub's had this problem. Anytime that you're building a repository of data that points out to other resources or allows for, scripting or pulling in or accessing of other services, you have to be able to integrate those tokens in at some point. And so there's always going to be this ability for someone else or for a developer not to realize that it's public and to drop those token values in there, right? So yeah, okay. So when they started the article, they're like, "Oh, we found these on GitHub." Great, we know that that's an issue. All right, so GitHub hasn't built that integration yet. They're not looking for Hugging Face tokens because realistically, are you expecting GitHub to watch every single service that's out there and save you from it? As a developer, right? You're not, right? Let's be honest. Hugging Face, like you get further into that article and they talk about how Hugging Face is doing the same thing, and they have Microsoft tokens and other things that you can access through their search interface as well. And that's where you're going back to, like NPM, GitHub, PyPy, every other repository, package manager that's out there allows you to insert variables that you can then use when you make calls. And so, like you expect to be able to do that as a developer. You expect it to be protected from it. I don't know about that, right? Like, at some point it's on the developers, and the Hugging Face is called out. Hey, you don't want anybody to get access to your API keys. We know this as developers, right? Like, you have access to my GitHub token. You have access, my PAT, you have access to my account, period. And yes, GitHub does some things to protect me if someone does get access to those API tokens. And Hugging Face they'll probably get to that point as well. But I don't really blame them for that, right? Like, it's great, it's great to call it out. It's great to ask for some additional security controls on top of that. But it's a natural evolution of a service that becomes popular.
It really is. And I understand that quote unquote developers need to protect themselves, sure, cool. I mean, at the same time, who hasn't made a mistake, right? It's not that hard to make these types of mistakes. It's not that hard to have a slightly off entry and your git ignore and a key gets, pushed to a repo. It's just not that hard. And it's sort of like that thing of, it's kind of, and it kind of even bleeds into our next article again, accidentally, because it's like philosophically, it is a thing of how would, I guess, it's not crazy to think that GitHub could have looked at, the current, considering their huge push into AI, but I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying it's not crazy to think that they could have built in, a scan for these types of keys, or maybe they already are. A lot of times this stuff is already happening behind the scenes, and with a platform like GitHub, it really takes a lot of testing when you integrate anything new, anything even small. It does. Like you have to, because we're talking about a huge, massive scale. You have to be very, very careful when you're introducing changes. So anyways, it's philosophically the cat and mouse game, right? It's like that. Well, okay, we have all these things we've built, but we didn't build it for this thing yet. So now this thing has to be brought into the fold because now it's a thing. And it's like that again, philosophically, the whole like,
well, and it becomes a priority.
It's tough being in security.
It is. It's a prioritization effort, and like, so from a program development. Okay, so if you put your CTO hat on as Ken Johnson over at Dry Run Security, right? Like, what is the highest priority thing to get out the door? Is it searching for other people's API tokens in your code base?
Really?
It's not, right? Like, I'm like, Hugging Face has like, that the CTO, the developers, the security team over there is focused on delivering the product and it being stable. Because guess what? If they don't do that, they're not going to meet their investors' expectations. They're not going to meet that, like all their other deadlines. And yes, okay, it's great, that Lasso Security or whoever went out and found this, and it's changed the prioritization, I'm sure, at Hugging Face's on their Jira board as to what they actually have to solve next. Yeah. because now it's a thing. But had they not highlighted it, eventually it probably would have come out, right? Like, it would have. It's just a matter of, was that was that the most sensitive function or the highest priority for Hugging Face? Nah, probably not, right?
No, definitely not. Of all the millions of things they've got going on, I'm sure that's not the highest. It doesn't mean it's not important. It's just like, okay, cool. This is another thing to kind of shore up in various ways. So yeah, you're right. It is a bit on, and I'm happy to be clear. Like, this is great that a security researcher did some, or in this case, a company, but yeah, a security researcher went and looked into, this. And like you said, made it a priority. So I applaud that. That's awesome. It's just kind of funny because to me, it's just like the same thing in a different form again. And so we'll watch the evolution for sure.
Well, I mean, that's just it, right? Like, okay, you're coming up with a program manager, you're building a package manager. I mean, maybe this is one of the things that just becomes a bigger issue, right? It probably will over time because the more popular you get, the more likely it is that you're going to have this, you're going to have these tokens. You become a watering hole. Okay, I go back to my, 60s, 70s terminology for security issues, and watering hole attacks is, in that list, because the second that something becomes popular, you can use that to attack other people. Whether that is, hosting content that's unintended, people pushing out sensitive information to that. It's a place that I can go for that. And that's going to be the natural progression here as well. Okay, Hugging Face is now popular. People are going there. They're pulling code down. All right, what happens when I push up malicious code, when I push up a malicious model, when I have something else that goes on inside of their platform to target the users of that platform? It's going to happen, right? Same thing happened with GitHub, with like the ability to pull packages directly from GitHub. And, there's just like so many of these issues that are going to bleed from package manager to package manager. Maybe we should start a OWASP top 10 for package managers. But
yeah, I mean, leak tokens
is another
there, right? Sensitive.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting space. I know that it's going to be a lot of the same things that have plagued us in software security, just with a slightly different bend in this new AI LLM world. And that's okay. We're just doing our best to be the cleanup crew as usual, right?
Yeah. Okay. But that does bring us to this next article though, right? Because I know there's feelings about it. Let me post it here. Okay, this is from Kelly Shortridge. It's one that she posted not too long ago. The title of it is Cybersecurity Isn't Special.
Yes.
And like I have like initially like my reaction to this is, yeah, I agree, right? And I know we're going to dig into some of the points that are, that she brings up here. In general, security is just another facet of business. Like the more that we treat it like a process, that we treat it with the same discipline that we treat development, engineering, other things, the better off we're going to be. But then, she digs in and to the different points that someone makes when they cite why cybersecurity is different, or security in general is different, right? And like, I know if you've been in the industry for any amount of time, you've had these feelings, especially at different organizations, even coming in as a third party to a lot of organizations. I see security being treated in a multitude of different ways, right? Whether it's integrated into the security, like they have their own security team, it's integrated in with the technology operations, it's integrated into like, legal, or right. Like I've run into basically every iteration of where a security team can sit and who they're responsible to. And the question I often get is, okay, what's best? Like, where is it that security should actually fit? And I always hate to say it, but it depends. It's all dependent on the organization and where they can actually get shit done, right? Like that's what it comes down to, is where are they most effective. But okay, so aside from that, the article itself, let's start with this list of reasons why someone says cybersecurity is special. Because I know like you had an initial reaction to, especially the first one, right? Like, it's hard to prove our value because it's based on counterfactuals. It's hard to prove that security did its job, because the only time security isn't effective is the time. Oh, well, how am I saying this? You only notice security when it fails, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of this statement. And this is completely valid in a lot of organizations, is that they're afraid that their product or whatever it is going to be hacked. They're going to release data. And so like, how do you justify a huge security budget when the only thing that you're protecting against is the existence of the non-existence of an attack, right? Or the prevention of something.
Yeah, but the article kind of ends up being more about it's like,
yeah.
The article. It's hard for me to formulate because it's, we just saw this like, I think an hour and a half ago, we kind of brought this up and started talking about it. But something about the article itself like bothers me, and it's hard to put a finger on it. And I feel like it's maybe because, well, I mean, if I'm being very truthful, the argument's a little boring. I've heard this many years, that like security is not special and all that stuff. So this is nothing new. Also, the solutions at the end of the article are stuff that we're already doing and have been doing for several years now. So I think maybe that's what bothers me, is the article's premise. Like, I think what its goal is and how it structures the conversation to get to that goal I don't like the way that the path that we got to get to the goal, but I think the goal is ultimately, all right, in presumably security shops, not the security shops I've worked with, right? Because like I've been fortunate enough to, when I worked at GitHub, work around, we had these AppSec councils, they still have them. And it consists of all these companies doing really awesome AppSec work, maybe even considerably bleeding edge. So I recognize that there's parts in the industry, there's many, I'm sure, security shops that are still on the like block things. So like have a sprint, do a review and block. I'm sure there's got to be shops still doing that. That's not that interesting to me, because those shops just haven't caught up to where like the industry's going yet. They'll get there eventually, I'm sure. I think what it's really trying to say, though, is that the way we've implemented our processes aren't great, and that there are, it's usually a focus on kind of, if I had to really get succinct, the premise is that we're all just trying to make sure everything is 100% secure. And then only once we feel like software's at that point can it leave and go to people. I don't feel that that's, again, the true of a lot of the more evolved AppSec shops that I've seen out there, right? It's more of exactly what she talks about at the end, which is like, or the recommendations, which are like paved paths. Yeah, paved paths are very important. You should 100% overwrite insecure functions. You should say, hey, we're going to bolster the security of whatever these chosen frameworks are. We should have, review process isn't so much a review process, but it's a awareness process. And if you're off the paved path, then, here's things to be aware of. And we'll have like special exception cases and ways and process to handle those special exceptions. A lot of people have gone to having their developers do their own threat modeling. And that's another sort of solution to not be a roadblocker, but, reduce risk meaningfully. There's a whole bunch of other, essentially, this is actually the blog I put out on the blog I put out today for Dry Run talks about risk reduction, but that's essentially, I think, what is really going for is like, when you zoom out of all the recommendations, that's like building standardized patterns, abandon the perimeter model, advise, don't dictate, ask platform teams to integrate security, follow platform SRE's lead. They're all things we've started to move towards 3 years ago, 4 years ago, at least, maybe 6 years ago. So I'm just like, yeah. I don't mean to crap on the article, but I think the premise is correct. Risk reduction is correct. I don't like the whole, well, let's start off with a really negative sentence that assumes that all these cybersecurity people are just people that think they're so amazing and special. I don't know if that's the right way to open up that conversation. You know what I mean? It's kind of been done. It's kind of old. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to crap on, because like, I respect Kelly. That's not the point. I'm just being very honest about my thoughts on this blog.
Yeah, and I was going to say that maybe that's where the reaction is coming from for you, is that we are framing things based on a set of 6 criteria that we have discounted for years, right? We've always known that we shouldn't be approaching security from this way, right? Like, yeah, I mean, software systems are so complex. How could we ever hope to understand them or secure them? Oh, come on, right? Like, we're developers. They're not complex. Let's be honest. Like,
I mean, they might be overly unnecessarily complex sometimes, but yeah. But that's not, that shouldn't be that way. That's not, it's not ideal.
I mean, and granted, right? Like, it's probably more that, as you're trying to market yourself and like have a catchy headline and a title, right? Like, the whole reason that we're talking about it, right? Because it pops up and, cybersecurity isn't special. And we start to, at least have some thoughts about it to see if there is anything new that's in there from an approach perspective that we should be considering. So I mean,
I agree that's probably highly with the, yeah, that's probably what it is. I mean, no, I agree. I will say I agree with some of the things, like software resilience versus being completely, 100%, because it's just not a realistic goal. But in terms of like being 100% locked down before software ships, I mean, you can, as long as it's super small software, you don't ship that often, and you have like a big team to review. Basically, my first, couple years of GitHub. If you have that scenario, yeah, you can. But most of the time, it's more about resilience, right? It's just making sure that you have like all of the things that are talked about there. I just don't think cybersecurity is special. I don't know that I know anybody who thinks cybersecurity is special, or at least have ever communicated that to me. So that's why the first part of it's kind of like, I think a better premise here would be, okay, what are some strategies for resilience and risk reduction, and how can we, achieve those goals, rather than spending so much time kind of with this emotive sort of assumption of how we all feel about the industry and ourselves and whatnot. So that, It's respectfully, I like some part of the article and I don't like some other parts of the article.
Yeah, advise, don't dictate, right? Ask platform teams, provide isolation patterns, conduct user research, right? Like it's all, yeah, it's stuff that
Yeah, I
we've
mean,
talked
like
about in the past, right? Yeah.
caught software and isolating it. I mean, we definitely did at GitHub when we changed our strategy after, I don't remember when, but the early days of when I was at GitHub, we did that, right? We would take any application that not just COTS, but any application we even built that didn't do anything like with, auth or store any meaningful data or anything like that. We put that on, I'm okay to say it now because there's nothing on Heroku anymore that I know of. But at the time, we had put everything on Heroku just because it was like anything that didn't, as a means of isolation, anything that wasn't like scary, we just put it over there. We're like, hey, hands off,
Yeah.
and we don't really concern ourselves with it. Everything else that is important is self-hosted, goes through the appropriate processes and all that stuff. And that's how actually one way we were really able to take a small team, but also relatively a small amount of engineers at that time and do, mostly manual code reviews with the majority of significant feature shipping, if not all, and new services coming online.
Yeah.
The user research one's interesting though. What do you think of that? The conduct user research point.
Let me see. Goals, constraint, workflows.
So an example would be,
Yeah,
she mentions like
SSO.
rolling out SSO. Yeah.
No, I'm with it. Like, a lot of that goes back to this idea of developers and users understand an application better than like a security team. Well, okay, let me back up. Better than a third party that's coming in and like trying to test an application. And this goes back to like my sputter days of, hey, guess what? We should be writing user acceptance tests that with a security bent, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to go run, Burp Suite against an app and try and test it and find vulnerabilities, right? And we always have this discussion, right? Like, we've had multiple companies that we've worked with where we've recommended things like, hey, CAPTCHA or 2FA or SSO, and they default to using reCAPTCHA and then tune it up so far that it almost becomes impossible to use from a user perspective, like a login process. And from a testing perspective, yeah, like we can laugh about it because I start to question my sanity on whether or not I'm a robot because I get so many pop-ups and I'm identifying chimneys and bicycles and crosswalks and all that jazz like over and over and over to test an application. But when the application functionality doesn't match the security that you're putting in front of it, that's where the user experience fails. And that's where I go back to, yes, UI research is important, right? User experience is important. And it's great to have like the most secure product ever. But guess what? If you're some social media site that, doesn't handle credit cards, that's all just user posted content or whatever it is, right? Like you're an X, you're somebody else. Maybe there's not the need for, 15 layers of authentication for someone to get in, because like you're just not protecting, you're not on the level of some DoD installation. And the most secure product is great, but it doesn't match the business case. It doesn't match a user's expectation. And if you don't, guess what? Security actually becomes a blocker to users onboarding and to users actually paying for an application. You've just killed the business, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's where I go with it as far as like building out user experience and doing user experience testing, because and to Kelly's point here, security is just one facet of an application, and at times it's not the most important piece.
No, and to add to what you're saying, user experience isn't just like in an app, right? It's like in your processes too, right? It's like the process is. Like I actually made things pretty hard for developers momentarily by when we were at GitHub. We switched some things around in our review process, and then immediate feedback when we talked to developers was like, hey, that's a bit heavy handed. It's a lot, also here's a bunch of other like friction points. And so we just kept going back and refining and getting feedback and refining. And it's because like, if you make a process something that's actually not horrible to use, in our case anyways, people definitely wanted to use it and definitely wanted to do the right thing and definitely wanted to, when audit time came, be the ones that can show that they did everything the right way.
Yeah.
But if you make it so hard that they can't ship software, then nobody wants to use that process and we all kind of fall down. And that's just true. So anyways, my point is, it's not just technical type deal, right? It's very much process as well.
Yeah. I know. I would agree with you. And it partially stems from understanding what your audience is and who, what it is that you're trying to secure. So yeah, we have this discussion quite often as a third party coming in. I know we did it, as we worked together in previous jobs too, as a third party, when you're looking at code, is this idea that what I rate as like the severity ratings that I end up with, even if I'm using something like CVSS, when I find a vulnerability, when I find an exploit, are not necessarily going to match what the business will interpret as risk to them and to their infrastructure, right? You asked me to come in and test an application. I find something like SQL injection in the application, and I'm going to rate it as high or critical based on what I'm able to do and with the data that I'm going to be able to get out of that. But an organization should take that with a grain of salt, since maybe that application is sectioned off, like in the case that you're talking about, Ken, with GitHub. It's in it's been dropped onto a network where it doesn't have access to anything else. It doesn't hold sensitive data to the organization. It doesn't allow for functionality changes to the application's core project. And so, yes, there's some reputational risk and there's the possibility of taking down, say, this integration. They're going to want to evaluate that separately, right? And it doesn't mean that that's not a high risk vulnerability if you're looking solely at that application in the scope that we're looking at it. But it also means that the organization has to take that into account and it has to do some sort of risk analysis on all of the vulnerabilities and the prioritization. And this even goes back to what Hugging Face is dealing with now, right? Hey, how critical is it that we protect customers from exposing the API keys that we give them, right? Because it's partially on the customer to actually protect against that. But there's so many other things that I need to take into account as to what the prioritization is, what the risk is to my organization, that's all going to feed into my own analysis of this. And like it always kind of shows an immaturity of an organization when they ask me as a third party to classify risk for the organization as a whole, as based on a small scope of this single application that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Because when they come back and they're like, well, that's protected and it's behind a firewall. And I'm like, great, right? Like, take that into account. Yeah. They're like, well, can you lower that risk? And I'm like, you want me to lower risk? And I haven't tested all of this other stuff. I have no idea whether or not your firewall is effective, whether or not like your VPN is restricting, or like all of these other controls that you have in place. I'm like, that's why you have a security team. That's why you have like threat modeling. That's why you have all these other pieces. And if you ask me as a third party to come in and tell you what that prioritization should be, I'm afraid for other things that are going on in your organization, because, right, like, typically what I'm looking at is not your highest priority app. Yes, sometimes it is, but most of the time it's probably not. And there's just so much more that goes into it.
Dude, right? I'll never forget the first time I ever experienced that, which was obviously immediately in my career, right? Where they're like, they're asking all these questions and I'm like, what? Why? Like, I don't know. This is very simple. Like, here's the thing, and here's the way it responded, and it's very obvious, and that's the level of criticality for that vulnerability. I, it makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
why are we having this? And I remember honestly, I remember back to this because it was like the first time I ever dealt with it. And I was like really just confused until it dawned on me. Oh, they just want an exec sum that looks clean and like they can share
Yeah.
with someone somewhere. And yeah, so the first time you ever go through that and you've never experienced that, you're like, what? And what are you trying to do here? Why are you doing this? And then you realize, like, yeah, and then that becomes a little depressing later down the line, years into it, where you're like, all right, I know what it's going to be. I'm going to give this report. You're going to try and negotiate it down. Like, all right, here we go. Here comes the negotiations and me making it defensible as to how I gave this rating, and all that fun jazz, as they say.
Well, and it's interesting as you move through different kind of industries and how that happens, right? Like, as you deal with security teams at large organizations like a GitHub, right? Like they understand this process. They have a whole like risk categorization and prioritization process of what they push to developers. And like, I have other organizations that I work with that's one of the first things that we talk about is, hey, you've got a vulnerability management program, right? You are bringing those all in. It doesn't matter the source. You're talking about them. You're deciding what should be worked on, how it should be done. And I'm like, that's awesome. And then, I get into like the Web3 space and the developers just freak out, right? Like on anything, because for whatever reason, like in Web3, since everything's public, they always want to publish all their reports, right? And push them out to the world. And so having anything on the report that says they're insecure is just, world ending, and they'll like negotiate and they'll complain and they'll give you like 15 ways to why this isn't a real thing. And it kind of goes back to maturity of the different verticals, I guess, business verticals in how they approach security, and the maturity levels of those organizations or those developers, what they've dealt with in the past. I don't know. I think I mentioned it on the podcast previously. Like we had a company last year, early this year, whatever it was, right? Like we went in, did a full like code review and assessment, found some fairly serious things. So, produced a report and the executive summary, just like in the objective summary, right? Like, hey, they went through and fixed everything. But the initial analysis was, this application is moderately insecure, right?
Yeah.
Those two words by themselves, they came back, and like the security guy came back to me and he's like, is there any way that we can get taken off the report? I'm like, well, the next sentence says like it's been fixed and it's now. And he's like, yeah, but I'm just getting, and I'm like, it is what he's like, I know. Can we do another assessment in 2 weeks? Right? Like, so basically they paid for us to come back in. And I was like, guys, right? Like, and it was all because of this customer perception that, like we had a vulnerability. I'm like, it shows more security know-how and security like mindset of, hey, we had these vulnerabilities, we went in and fixed them, than it does to be like, hey, we were always secure, right? Like it just like from an auditor's perspective, from customer perspective, we know that every organization that's out there has vulnerabilities. It's a matter of when, not if. So like you want to discover them and quash them, show that process. Don't show that clean report. It was just like, and the security guy, to his credit, was just like dumbfounded that he had to even ask us, and that they were willing to spend that much more money to go in and do the same thing again. Right. And I was like, well, great, right? Like, we'll do what you want us to. But like getting that checkbox is, it's disheartening, right? Like, yeah, it's disheartening.
Well, it's disheartening too, because you want to be, entirely, I mean, I do anyways. I know you do, entirely objective, as much as a scientific sort of approach to all of it and the results therein, as possible. Obviously there's always gonna be a little bit of art to this field as well, but you just don't want to be subjective. And actually Larry mentioned that. He said, like, if you're trying to if you're waiting for someone to identify your risks for you, you're going to get a freemium risk assessment. He's absolutely right. Like the beautiful part of doing an application assessment and giving your summary opinion is that it's not as much of an opinion as it is. I'm saying opinion. I really shouldn't say opinion because it's not necessarily an opinion, or it's sort of like, well, given this level of surface available in the application, and then the results that we had come back, and then what the purpose of the application is, who it's doing that for. Yeah, this is got some insecure stuff or not, and here's typically you put in how many of whatever findings that's the way it used to be, right? You put in like, here's the amount of findings that we have, basically like stats. Here's what their criticality was. Here's what's been remediated. Pretty normal stuff, not very subjective, and that's the beauty of it, right? So then, if you're asking for just like a broader risk assessment, it's like, well, that's going to be very opinionated, very based on my experiences. That becomes much more subjective. And again, I don't, like, to your point, I don't have the full picture of your organization, of this application's importance in it, what politics you guys all have going on, what your business goals are, what things you might be, regulatory things you might be dealing with. I don't know all that stuff. I don't know how many security, controls in general you have. It's just, I don't know that stuff. So you want me to sit here and make that judgment? It's like, yeah, I'll do that all day. Yeah,
everyone has opinions.
A phrase from Tommy Boy, but yeah, if you want me to take in a box and label it guaranteed, I can do that for you. But anyways.
Well, I've had it the flip side too, right? Like where the security team can't get traction. And so they'll come in and I'll be like, oh yeah, we found these things. The app's like, okay, right. And they'll be like, well, can we get you to like raise these two to, high? So we have to, like, we force the team to go fix them. I was like, okay, right. Like again, right. The political ramifications of that. I'm always like, ooh, yeah.
And as a business owner, right? These are your customers. So it's just such it really is like a tough situation, to kind of navigate always. But I think like that's having those soft skills, or why it's or why it's so critical to have those soft skills as a consultant. For these moments.
Yeah. But anyway.
But yeah, any other final thoughts on this article, by the way?
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I know she brings up a lot of stuff. Some stuff we agree with, some stuff not. But if I want to play the game of indulging, that cybersecurity special, I would say, no, it's not. I mean, you and I have talked about that a lot. We have a different bend to it. It's kind of funny too. Like it's stuff like the presumption that we believe that attackers are especially clever humans whose purpose in life is to harm us. But that's it's contradictory in a way, because like I would say most of what you hear security people say is like, it only takes an attacker getting lucky once and us doing the right thing all the time, but them getting lucky once. That doesn't sound like we think that they're the most amazing, clever humans. It just sounds like, yeah, if someone makes a mistake and they happen to capitalize on it and are lucky enough to, you know what I mean? So there's just like these statements that are contradictory. The cost center thing is real. I will agree with that. I think we are seen as a cost center. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. And there certainly are other parts of the business that are cost centers. So,
deal with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and full disclosure, man, I've never been a C-level suite executive for a security program inside of a large org. So that's one where I'm like, I'd actually be very curious to hear what it's like to go up and, year after year or quarter after quarter or whatever it may be, fight for a budget. That would be a very interesting thing to hear from someone, because I don't think I've ever been privy to the inner communication that occurs over things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I know that's always it kind of goes back to, right, like it's hard to prove a negative that the organization is effective, right? Like, because you want to cut down on a budget, when times are tight. It's hard to prove what's going on. But then you also, on the flip side, that's where you get all of these like really whacked out numbers on, our security team blocked 2 million attack attempts, right? It's because someone, scanned our network interface with Nmap, right? Like, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's always this, like, we have to justify our value from a CISO perspective, as a security organization. But how do you effectively do that, right? Like, from a process perspective, there's other things that you can tune into, and we can do a whole nother, talk on security metrics if we need to at some point. Other things that are more effective than, we blocked all this stuff on our outer edge, on our WAF or whatever it is, right? Because we know, we know those tools, right? Like, that's one of the places where it'd be interesting to see how AI starts to analyze those different attack scenarios and what's actually happening, because of, the understanding that goes into it, the context of what's actually going on. But a security metrics is another place where we could turn that.
Hey, since tools. You brought it up, I do want to plug it once again. It was plugged in our Slack, but I'm going to plug it again. It's the Stride GPT model that Mr. W. Adams put out. Anyways, it's pretty cool. It's essentially, it is a, let me make sure this is actually a model. It's my understanding that it's a model of threat. So it's an AI-powered threat modeling tool that leverages OpenAI's GPT models to generate threat models and attack trees based on Stride. So I actually plan on giving this a bit of a run. It is using OpenAI, and like, that's cool for proof of concept. I would say here's my take, if in case anyone's wondering on AI stuff. Definitely use OpenAI to get off the ground. When I say get off the ground, I mean experiment locally and all that stuff. When you move into production data, is the time you want to start thinking about migrating off to an LLM that you actually can control, and at the very least, not have your business cases and proprietary stuff sent to. That's been a question I've been asked. This, Seth, because we had this conversation in Austin where someone was like, when I gave my CSA talk, they were like, Ken's just recommending you send all your data to OpenAI. I was like, hold on, what now? No. I gave you early examples of how to use LLMs to do some analysis, and I even said this is a good way to kind of get started. This isn't how I would finish, right? But in any case, that's my take.
Cool. Yep. Nice. Well, good. I know we've been going for an hour. Feels like you and I just can go. So we'll go ahead and close it out for today. Just remember that there's always ways to approach security, right? Like, it's not, we're not necessarily special, right? But some of the initial arguments there are like stuff that we've discussed for years. I don't know. Any closing thoughts for today from you before we?
Besides, thank you for doing the show this many years for me, Seth. I mean, we're at the holiday times. I feel like a little nostalgic, a little thankful and grateful, and so I appreciate you doing this show with me for nearly 6 years now. Appreciate everybody who's supporting. Yeah, I know, and listening. I did actually get those. Finally got all the swag and all the prizes and stuff for SecDem shipped out last week. So everybody has their tracking links, and can somebody already got some of their stuff. So I got a nice message about that. And for our international folks, I can see it. It's almost there. The last thing I'll just mention once again. All right, if you'd like to try the open beta for app.dryrun.security. And you want to get activated quicker, because we're vetting folks before we just activate them. Just DM me in our Absolute AppSec Slack, or hit me up and DM on Twitter, or just send it to Ken at absoluteappsec.com. I don't know. Actually, sorry, not Ken at Absolute AppSec. Jeez, Ken at dryrun.security. Sorry, my bad. Anyways, okay, cool. That's all I'll say. Thank you, everybody. Seriously, it's really, I don't know, it's just really nice to have this community.
It is. It's pretty awesome. So join us on Slack if you're not there already. Probably you are, but if you're not, come join us. Yep. Merry Christmas, Jason. Thanks so much. We'll see everybody online.
Cheers. If I can figure out how to